You've probably never heard her name before, but the labor movement that won workers the right to a lunch break, overtime pay, and protections against unauthorized pay cuts. She was one of the people doing the hardest, most dangerous work of that fight. Her name was Luisa Moreno, and when they couldn't buy her silence, they deported her. Hi, everybody. I'm Shar, and I want to tell you who Luisa Moreno was before the organizing, before the union halls, the courtrooms, and the ice picks, because her story matters. Now, Luisa was born in 1907 in Guatemala City. She was born to an upper class family. She had private schools, a life with money, connections, and options. The kind of life most people would never ever want to walk away from. But she did. At 19, she was ready to attend university in Guatemala. But at that time, women weren't allowed into Guatemalan universities. And instead of going somewhere else or finding a workaround or just plain accepting it, she organized her peers and lobbied until the doors opened for all women to attend all universities in Guatemala. That was 19 years old. She picked her first fight and she won. Now, after university, she moved to Mexico City and became a journalist and she published poetry. And then in 1928, she came to New York City with her husband and infant daughter. They were chasing a better life. Within a year, that better life fell apart. Her husband couldn't find steady work, so Luisa found work as a sewing machine operator in the garment district at a sweatshop in Spanish Harlem. She endured long hours, low wages, and dangerous conditions. She was surrounded by Latino women and immigrants trying to hold families together on wages that barely covered rent. These were women who had no idea they had the power to change their situation. But Luisa did. She started doing what she had always done, talking to people, learning names, asking questions, finding out who's getting shorted on hours, whose landlord was threatening eviction, whose kid was getting sick because the building had no heat. She had built a map of everything that was wrong, and then she started connecting the women to each other so they could see it too. One conversation at a time, one grievance at a time. There was nothing dramatic happening yet, just the slow work of helping people understand that what was happening to them wasn't just bad luck. It was a choice someone else was making, and choices that could be fought. Those conversations turned into something. Women organized. They filed grievances. They pushed back on the conditions they were told they had to accept. And they started winning. They were winning things that really mattered to those women who had nothing to spare. Through all this work, the American Federation of Labor noticed what Luisa was doing. Not just the conversations, but what she was building and the results she was getting. And they hired her as a professional organizer. The AFL then sent Luisa to Florida to help organize Black and Latino cigar workers. Now, you have to realize this was the 1930s, and racism was more common than cars in the South. The KKK was actively murdering anyone that did not agree with them, and this included labor organizers in Florida. And a friend of Luisa's had just been killed by the Klan months before she had arrived. When the AFL took her down there, they figured Luisa would be safe because she was a light-skinned woman. And despite the danger, she went anyways. Once, during a union hall meeting, someone came at her with an ice pick. It still didn't stop her. She kept organizing. And that's not something you do because it's your job. Luisa knew this was what she had to do because she already decided the fight mattered more than her own safety. Well, after several months of building trust with the workers and constant harassment from the opposition, she successfully negotiated a contract for the workers. A real contract this time, with protections and teeth. Then the AFL showed up and they showed her exactly who they were. They revised the contract behind her back with no worker input. The terms were weakened and the protections were extremely cut. They deliberately handed the workers something weaker than what Luisa worked so hard for and promised them. And they didn't tell her until it was all said and done. Luisa resigned right on the spot. She then decided to move out west. She moved on and joined the United Cannery Agricultural Packing and Allied Workers of America, organizing all across the West. And that's where she soon earned the title called the California Whirlwind. Luisa worked with pecan shellers in San Antonio, cannery workers across Southern California, citrus workers in Riverside and Redlands. She wrote pamphlets in English and in Spanish. She showed up in neighborhoods where nobody expected to see her, all the while leaving behind a trail of successful union contracts everywhere she went. By 1941, she had gotten so good at this, so undeniably effective, that the workers she had been fighting for elected her vice president of the UCAPAWA, the first Latina ever elected to a high-ranking national position in a U.S. trade organization. But she wasn't just organizing individual contracts. She was building something much bigger. And in 1938, she founded, bear with me everybody, the El Congreso de Pueblos de la Habla Español, the first national Latin civil rights assembly in U.S. history. Housing discrimination, employment discrimination, immigrant workers being exploited with no protection and no recourse. She was working on all of it. And in 1942, when the Bracero program brought hundreds of thousands of Mexican workers into the U.S. under contracts that gave them practically no rights and made them completely dependent on their employers, Luisa was already there, fighting for the workers the program was designed to make powerless. That same year, she helped defend hundreds of young Mexican-American men in the Sleepy Lagoon case. That was where the city of Los Angeles rounded up and wrongfully arrested and prosecuted on manufactured charges and evidence these hundreds of Mexican-American young men. She helped build the defense committee that fought back, and she eventually helped them win. Then the country started to turn. After World War II, McCarthyism swept through the government, and they had decided that labor organizers, especially immigrant labor organizers, were a threat to national security. They targeted Luisa. The government offered her a deal: testify against other union leaders, name names, cooperate with the investigation. In exchange, citizenship. 20 years of her life in this country, 20 years of building, organizing, fighting, and winning. She could have had the papers and became a U.S. citizen. All she had to do was hand over the people who trusted her. But in a truly selfless act, she said no. And in 1950, they deported her. She had left the country she had given everything to and never came back. And this is the thing that needs to be remembered about Luisa. She knew what the offer meant. She understood exactly what she was trading. She chose the people she always fought for. And that's not a mistake. It's not a tragedy. That's a decision. And it's the clearest example of heart that I know. Not the warm, comfortable version of heart, but the one that costs you something real. And here's what we need to understand about why her name isn't in your history books. Now, we all know Cesar Chavez. You probably know Dolores Huerta, the United Farmers Workers, the great boycotts, the marches. Luisa Moreno came first. She built the organizing infrastructure, the legal frameworks, the coalition building model that made it all possible. She was deported in 1950, 12 years before the National Farm Workers Association in 1962. She laid the groundwork, and then she was gone. And when the movement she built found its public face, her name was never attached to it. We're taught the names of people who stood at the microphones, but we're not taught the names of the people who built the platforms they stood on. This isn't by accident, it's by design. Because the people in power understood that if workers know their history, if they know someone has already fought this fight and won, they won contracts, they built coalitions, and they refused to break, they'd be harder to control. So her name was erased. That's not paranoia. That's just how erasure works. And here's why I'm telling you this story right now. The conversations happening today about immigration, about who belongs and whose labor matters and whose rights are worth protecting, those aren't news conversations. Luisa Moreno was having them in 1938, 1942, and in 1950. And she didn't survive them by being careful. She survived them by being clear about what she was there to do and who she was there to serve. Now, if you're an outlier navigating an industry that wasn't built for you, and if you're in a room right now where the people question whether you even belong, and where your work gets undercredited, where you have to decide every single day whether you keep showing up, you're not the first. Luisa was there too. She cleared some of that ground. Many of the union contracts that she actually negotiated are still in place today. The civil rights framework she built are still being used. The rigging she set up is still holding weight. You're standing on her shoulders, whether history told you her name or not. And now you know it. Thanks, everybody. I'm Shar. Stay in the middle.